Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markowitz, and today we're getting an update from Emerita Resources. Emerita is traded on the TSX.V under the ticker EMO and on the OTCQB under the ticker EMOTF. And I'm joined today with the CEO and Chairman of Emerita, David Gower. And David, it's great to get you on the show for an update here to kick off 2025. We talked back in early November, and at the time, we were looking at your Iberian West Project, the IBW Project, located in southern Spain. And we were talking about the three main areas of focus, the three different deposit areas, which are La Romanera, La Infanta, and El Cura. And we were talking about your phase two metallurgical testing results. Now, you've continued to do more work, and you've even done a little bit beyond the phase two. I guess we're calling it phase two plus here. And you put out some results to the market on December 20th showing not just good results for the zinc and the lead and the copper and silver, but also some good gold recovery in here as well. Maybe walk us through all of the metallurgical work that your team has been doing at, really, these are focused on the La Romanera area of this and looking at some of the El Cura similarities and differences. So maybe walk us through the metallurgical work the team has been doing really all of last year and leading into these latest results.
Sure, and thank you for having me on, and Happy New Year. I think these results portend a very, very strong 2025 for us. We have successfully, on both La Romanera and La Infanta, so two of the three deposits, completed metallurgy now, which, as you point out, gives excellent results. Better recoveries and better concentrate grades than the existing producers in the region. And for us, one of the big nuts that we had to crack was the gold recoveries, because Romanera particularly and now El Cura are quite enriched in gold relative to other deposits in the belt. And so it was incumbent on us to find a way to liberate that value. As you know, our historical resource that we put out in 2023, there was about 7 to 800,000 ounces at Romanera. It's significantly higher now. With El Cura, it's getting higher. So the process that we put together and announced late last year, just before the break, we're now at 91.3% zinc recovery, 85.8% copper recovery, 80% silver recovery, and up to 64% gold recovery. So this is a huge improvement over when that resource was done. We didn't have metallurgy, but the zinc equivalent that was used only provided us with 20% gold recovery because they did not have another deposit like this to benchmark gold recoveries against. So this obviously, particularly at today's gold prices, has a massive impact on the value per ton of the ore where the gold is enriched. So from that work at Romanera, we'll see we've obviously done a lot of drilling since 2023, which will expand the deposit, and it remains open. But also the improved metallurgy also will improve the tons, because more tons that had higher gold in them and lower base metals will also come into the category and meet the cutoff. So it's a very positive outcome at this point. And we continue to do work on metallurgy. We probably will right up until the plant is built. The other interesting thing is with this process, it's a two-stage process. So a basic flotation initially, and then followed by a thermal process, and then a leaching using a process developed in Quebec, Canada, actually, the Clever technology, which has been developed by the Dundee research arm and has been commercialized recently. It's basically the route that gives us this high gold recovery and also enhanced base metal recoveries. The other interesting side effect of going this route is actually it reduces the amount of tailings by about 50% of the tailings that are treated with this, and they're not acid generating at the end. So from an environmental perspective, it actually adds a lot of value to the project, and that material is still available for paste backfill underground. So it's an innovative approach, but one that is tested and is commercialized now. And we see it as being a really important step potentially for the project.
All right, so you found a way to get better recoveries, which equates to better economics, more payable on the gold, which is nice, going from 20% to over 60%, 64% here. And like you say, less tailings, not acid leaching at the end. Now, when we had talked last time, David, you had floated out the idea that your team was also looking at, in addition to having a copper, a lead, and a zinc circuit, looking at possibly an arsenic circuit to recover the gold. Does this method, this two-stage method, alleviate that need and give you a different route then?
It does alleviate that need. However, we are continuing some final test work on that possibility as well. Approximately 60% of the gold that's in the tailings is in arsenopyrite, and that's only about 2.5% of the volume. So if we could produce a small arsenopyrite concentrate, there would be a very small leach plant involved. So we continue to pursue that. But importantly, we have a process here that delivers probably a better result, and it will involve slightly more capital and operating costs. From what we've preliminary work we've done on costs, though, it certainly is a robust economic project just to do the gold alone. If you can imagine, for the gold recoveries here, you have approximately 800,000 to 1 million ounces in a pile that's already been mined and ground up and sitting on surface with a grade of between 1.3 and 2 grams gold. That would be a project for any company to try to take on. So it's a very economically robust process, I believe, based on our preliminary work.
Well, and for those that are not metallurgical engineers or metals recovery experts, let's just also simplify this down to, when you look at these three deposit areas, La Romanera, La Infanta, and El Cura, really El Cura is more the newer kid on the block. But there's some slight differences in metallurgy between these three areas. So maybe just from a high sense, just kind of tell people what the development strategy would look like. Would you start with one particular area and then bring in the other? Would you be blending some of these areas together? Is there a sequence to how you would go after each of these three deposits? Maybe just from a high level, talk to us about what the high level strategy would be, David.
Sure. El Cura, each deposit is a little bit unique and yet similar. They're all volcanogenic massive sulfide deposits. Infanta is actually quite simple. We had no real issues there. It doesn't have the elevated gold that we see at La Romanera, and the metallurgy is really, really good there because there's almost no pyrite and it's very high grade. The three deposits are situated about 7 kilometers apart, with El Cura about halfway between La Romanera and La Infanta. The development plan for Romanera and for the project was actually to put the infrastructure near Infanta, because that area is just much better suited for placing the infrastructure from a permitting perspective and logistics perspective. As it turns out, El Cura, which is a copper-rich deposit, copper-gold rich relative to the other two, is halfway in between. So the ramp that we would be installing to access Romanera, in fact, will drift right past El Cura. So that deposit's development will be very cheap because essentially it's a side piece on the ramp that we put into the larger deposit, which is Romanera. The other interesting thing about El Cura is because we're still 3 or 4 kilometers of drifting from Romanera, we get early cash flow out of that. So that would, Infanta and El Cura would be mining early while we put in the development for the big mine, which is Romanera, which will give the whole project kind of that 20-25 year mine life we expect. All the deposits remain open. We expect to put out the new resource, which will include El Cura, around the end of February into March, but targeting certainly the first quarter of this year. It'll be substantially bigger than the previous one, I believe. We kind of know that now. And we can already start the modeling on La Infanta and La Romanera because we have the drilling done, we have the metallurgy done. The samples for the metallurgy for El Cura were sent in early December for testing. So we'll have that in this time frame. We're going to finish the holes that we're drilling right now, which will be around the middle of this month or the third week of this month. And then we'll start the modeling of El Cura as well. And there should be several million tons there, we expect. So It's going to be a very exciting upgrade, and that will be the material then that is used for the pre-feasibility study, which we'll conduct once we have the new resource and all the metallurgy sorted. So those will be the big catalysts coming up in the first half of this year. Will be all of that kickoff, and really looking forward to an exciting development process here. We also expect to get our AAU, which it's a Spanish term, but it's the environmental authorization. Could be as early as this month or next month for the project. So things are lining up very well. As we would have mentioned previously, this project has been given a designation of strategic importance by the government, and they are working with us and very diligently to see it succeed and get it through the process. So exciting developments and catalysts coming up for this project in the next, well, all of next year, really.
Yeah, so we'll be looking out for that updated resource that now will include El Cura. And then obviously that feeds into the economic study, working on those environmental permitting aspects and milestones as well. And I just want to circle back to the point you were making about El Cura, David, that it hasn't been included previously, but you continue to hit pay dirt with more and more drilling. You just put out some results in early December, so just about a month ago, and it was talking about one of the hits you had in El Cura, 13 meters grading 1% copper, over 1%, 1% lead, 3.3% zinc, 54 grams per ton silver, and 2.71 grams per ton gold. What stands out in there is exactly what you were talking about, the higher copper and gold grades, nice silver, maybe not as much emphasis on lead and zinc there. So it's going to be interesting to see how that factors in. Anything else you want to say about the ongoing exploration that you've done at El Cura?
Yeah, well, that hole that we put out in early December was the best hole we've had to date at El Cura. But also, we have a number of holes in that area of the deposit that are coming in at kind of 8 to 13 meter thicknesses. So building up very good tonnages and very good grades in that area. It is more of a copper gold with a good silver kick deposit. We have seen some preliminary metallurgic results on the base metals, and the copper recoveries are very good. We don't know about the precious metals, copper and zinc recoveries, even though there is less zinc. So we'll get this data and this testing done within the next month or so, we expect. And it'll be done in time to incorporate that into the 43101 resource update that we're going to do. But given its location, almost directly adjacent to the planned drift, it's a really good situation for the project as it'll be very low capital to develop it. And obviously much earlier cash flow than if we had to wait until we got all the development done at Romanera. It was the deposit we drilled last because we didn't have the historical drilling for it, and we kind of had to rediscover it. Whereas Infanta and Romanera, we had about 50 historical drill holes that we could base our program around. But these results that we're seeing recently are deeper, we believe, than the historical drilling. And we suspect this area where we're seeing these thicker intercepts are down between 200 and 300 meters depth only, but wide open below that and down plunge to the west. So we'll see where this one goes. It could be actually the main deposit of the region, who knows? But quite excited with what we're seeing there, and the timing is very good.
Well, David, it's just nice to see it stick its hands up and end up becoming maybe more than just an appetizer. It could become a main dish along with the other two deposit areas. And very nice that as you drift over from La Infanta over to Romanera, that it's along the way, along that path of development. And so you can just drift right into it. And like you say, bring some of that cash flow earlier in than expected initially. So it looks like it's working out on an exploration sense, on a metallurgical sense, and even on a development sense. So a lot of things coming together for the IBW project. Let's also mention that you have a second earlier stage project, but it's a large project. It's an exploration project called Nueva Tintillo. You do have some exploration work that the team did last year on it. What are the plans for this project in 2025?
So that we discovered that area with very high, well, relatively high gold grades in gaussons at surface. It's quite a wide zone, at least 20 meters wide, maybe a bit wider in places, although it's hard to tell with surface weathering. But grades, in the 1 to 3 gram range, which is what we see at Romanera, in fact, and it does tell us because this is a highly mineralized area, the whole pyrite belt, and some of the pyrite zones are barren. But when you see precious metals like that, usually what's at depth when you get to the fresh rock is mineralized. So we will be doing some geophysics over that initially and planning to drill that later in the year. So who knows? But certainly love to dream that it's going to be another significant deposit. Interestingly, most of the things we look at in the pyrite belt, because it's been active since before the Romans as an area to be mined, there's somewhere in the archives where you see some work that was done there. But at this zone, this new zone, which is actually almost within sight of the huge Rio Tinto mine, we can't see any reference to it anywhere in the archives. So it could actually be a brand new discovery.
Well, fingers crossed, David, that it is one of these big new discoveries. And I guess we'll know more as you do those surveys and get some drills on the ground here in 2025 later in the year. But just wanted to highlight it as yet another area of interest for the company. And then, of course, people listening in that are familiar with the Emerita story are probably tracking the clock every week, every month, as far as what will happen with Asnacoyer. This is the property we've talked about in the past that has gone to a legal dispute, and this is kind of the final step in the process here. Just in a very brief sense, David, just remind people of what happens in about 3 months.
So starting in March 3rd is the final phase of the trial, the criminal trial related to the awarding of the public tender for that process. In the previous appeals process, 5 Superior Court judges unanimously declared that numerous crimes of corruption were committed by as many as 16 individuals, mostly government, but some from another company. And some of these people would be likely looking at incarceration at the end of this process. The reason that's important under Spanish law, if there's the commission of a crime and awarding a public tender, that bid must be disqualified and it must go to the next highest bidder. And it's been 10 years almost, but we were the only other qualified bidder in that process. So at the end of this process, we would expect the administrative courts following the criminal court ruling to do essentially what they did at IBW, which also was a disputed property at one time. And the process would be that they will declare that the other tender was illegal by virtue of the crimes committed, and they must essentially reissue the awarding of that tender, and we're the only ones left standing. So sometime later this year, we expect the trial, because there are 16 individuals. This phase of it will take, I think they've got about 6 weeks of court time set aside for this. It's obviously a major high-profile issue in Spain when government officials are being charged with corruption. So it's all very senior judges that are involved in this, and judges that have a good track record of convicting people for these types of crimes. And following the hearings, there will be a period of deliberation. And then once the first of the people are actually convicted, then the administrative court will be able to reveal its ruling. It's already done its work. And so sometime I would expect third quarter of this year, we should see a final resolution to this entire thing. And of course, it is a really world-class deposit, which is why it's worth the effort to acquire it. And as a public tender, there are no major cash payments or anything tied to it. It's basically execute on the work program that we put in the tender. And this was already an operating mine, so there's a major deposit already drilled off as a mining reserve, and it would be a matter of redoing a feasibility and updating the metallurgy, because we'd be using more modern mills than was developed for the old mine, but it will be a very exciting project in the near future.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people waiting with bated breath to see how things go, but hopefully people get a sense out of the comments you just made that you're not going to know something right in March. It's going to take a while for this to play out, but hopefully by Q3 you'll have the visibility to see whether this is a project where you can execute that work program as designed and make those tweaks to it, as you mentioned, as far as how things would look as far as the mill and the engineering part of it. But exciting, really news on all three areas here: IBW, Nueva Tintillo, and Asnacollir. A lot going on with Emerita Resources. And so if you want to keep posted on what's going on, definitely go to the link below this interview. It takes you right over to the company website, straight to the Emerita news section where you can sign up for updates or follow along with the news as it hits the wire. Sounds like there's going to be a lot of news in 2025, so we'll keep following along with it here at the KE Report. David, great to get you on here to kick us off for the first interview of this year, and looking forward to talking to you again just in the near future when some of these other catalysts come home. So looking forward to our next conversation.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Chad. We'll talk again soon.